You're watching Bloomberg Law. I'm Lou Pacchia. If you've been watching this program for a while, you know that big law firms have had a rather tough go of things over the past couple of years. My guest today says that the problems big firms face are structural in nature, and that firms are only going to do well if they are able to face what he calls pricing pressures. Joining me now is Bruce MacEwen, law firm consultant and publisher at Adam Smith Esquire.
Thanks for having me.
You recently wrote that you've seen major law firms submitting what you called suicide pricing proposals. What exactly are those?
Let's back up for a second. A little microeconomics 101. This industry has excess capacity. Industries with excess capacity, it happens to the airlines every decade or so, face enormous pricing pressure because they have fixed costs they want to cover, and they will do almost anything they can to get revenue in the door. That's what some big law firms have been doing in what I call these suicidal pricing submissions in response to RFPs or whatever. They just want to get the business, and they'll worry about whether or not they make money later.
When we talk about these firms, can we start to get a sense of which kind of firms are submitting these proposals?
You know,
can we name names?
It's really across the board. I mean, it's literally happening with some of the finest, white shoe firms in New York. It's certainly happening in the middle market, what you'd call maybe the AmLaw 40 to 80. Because, as you said, leading off, what the industry is facing is structural. It's not a problem facing a unique segment of the industry.
Is it at the point where we're basically calling this a race to the bottom in AmLaw 200, or is this still something that's somewhat isolated?
Fortunately, it's somewhat isolated at this point. Longer term, I think the industry, and that's something I'd like to talk about, I think the industry is going to have to restructure itself in ways that aren't on anybody's radar really today.
Such as?
Leverage is much too high, I think, for the world going forward. There are too many associates per partner. Clients don't want to pay a lot of money for associates anymore, and sometimes they don't want to pay for associates at all. There's also a threat on the horizon which a lot of people are aware of, but I think the industry is still in denial about it, Lee, which are the legal process outsourcers, or the LPOs. I saw an estimate from a Magic Circle firm in the UK last week that pegged the LPO global revenue, the LPO market global revenue at $640 million US last year, and they're estimating $4 billion in 2014.
Wow.
It's an 85% compound annual growth.
So if we're in a situation where firms are seemingly slashing prices in order to keep their associates busy, are we coming up on another round of layoffs, in your opinion?
It's entirely possible. The first half of this year, if you look at the Citi, Hildebrandt, Wells Fargo numbers, any of them, the first half of this year was actually decent in terms of demand, volume, and activity. The second half, this is again across the board, averaging different firms. Your mileage may vary. Second half has been very disappointing, down, and that really leads to a problem in the law firm business model, because there is such a high degree of fixed costs, which is occupancy, but most of all, it's salaries and compensation for human beings. And that's the only thing that firms can actually control in the relatively short run.
Interesting. So how likely do you think it is, as you suggested in your article, that big law firms will price themselves into a situation analogous to what we're seeing in department stores, where everyone comes to a certain understanding that prices can always go lower? Is that the end point for this process that you're seeing unfold in big law?
Well, the department store industry is a great example. I mean, they trained us only to buy when it's like 40% off. And unfortunately, because of the dynamics of an industry with excess capacity, that's a route big law could go down. My prediction, if that's what you're asking for, is that a few firms will do that. They will succumb to that temptation at potentially devastating cost, meaning they will fail. And the rest of the industry will learn you actually cannot do that. The airlines, for every time they do develop excess capacity, they manage to pull out of it somehow or other. It's often a painful period. In the case of the airlines, it's involved bankruptcy historically, which is not an option for a law firm. You never come out of bankruptcy, you only go in. But
right, they tend not to fare well in that process.
They do not.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, the reason is really very simple. You know, General Motors could lose money for 30 years and remain a viable enterprise. A law firm cannot really lose money for even 1 year and remain viable, because that's what they pay their partners with. And if their partners aren't getting paid, this is not a stable situation.
Right. In terms of restructuring, you brought up the notion of associate headcount. On the partner side of the equation, we haven't seen too many reports, although one came out yesterday talking about the situation in the United Kingdom where partner roles are lowering at firms. And it was only just slightly. I think out of 33,000 partners in the UK at large law firms, I think 150 are no longer there in the first 6 months of this year. Do you expect that trend to accelerate?
I think it has to, for two reasons. I mean, we have avoided the really difficult, awkward conversations up until now.
Yeah, getting a partner to leave a firm is hard.
It's very hard. And a lot of partner agreements require a supermajority vote, actually, to expel somebody. Now, you can play games. You can say, guess what, Lee? You're not going to make $1.4 million this year. You're going to make what a first-year starting associate makes. People get the message. But we have avoided having those conversations. I think the day is coming, inevitably, because that's where the money is.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about what this restructuring period is going to look like for associates and for partners. Do you think it's possible to get through this restructuring wave without seeing more Dewey & LaBeoufs, more firms, more large firms closing their doors for good?
That's exactly what I worry about. And I'll tell you what really has me struggling to find a way through is, how do you cut partner compensation systematically and survive without triggering a run on your own bank, as it were. But I think that here's a great statistic. I just figured this out the other day. So the AmLaw 100 is 25 years old. 25 years ago, the compensation of the average partner in the AmLaw 100 was about 11 times the average individual American workers' comp. Last year, it was over 23 times. You cannot grow that tree to the sky forever. And my sad but firm belief is that we've entered an environment where not only can't you grow that tree anymore, the tree is going to be pruned.
We've seen some reports on the rise of the so-called pricing director. Are firms that hire these positions also the ones that are engaged in the suicide pricing model we spoke about earlier?
No, I think they are hiring those people precisely to avoid that. And
do you think they're effective? Pricing directors, in theory?
Yes, they're going to learn. I mean, business has done this. Corporations have done this. I mean, if you step back, what's been going on in corporate America or the FTSE 100 or whatever cohort you want to look at for the last 30 years. That it's been Six Sigma, re-engineering, right-sizing, kaizening, whatever. And the only industry that seems to have magically been immune to date is big law. I don't think that can continue.
Just in summation here, are you getting a sense when you talk to large law firms in your day-to-day that they get it? Or are they completely lost in the woods, or is it somewhere in between? How aware are they?
I would say it's bimodal. It's neither extreme, and it's not in between. Some firms get it completely, and we're talking about managing partners typically. Other firms just are hoping they can hold their breath and it'll be 2006 again. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I realize more firmly the longer I work with law firms is most partners actually don't understand the firm's business. They'll tell you they do. They'll tell you they're curious about it. They don't get it, and they're not curious.
Right. And as firms get larger, it only becomes more complicated and more difficult for them to get a feel for what's actually happening.
It becomes more complicated. It's not their job. They want to serve their clients. That's why they're lawyers. That's why they made partner. But it presents a tremendous challenge to managing partners who have to now cabin this, what has been a linear, growth in partner expectations for 25 years.
We'll see how it all plays out. Bruce, I want to thank you for stopping by today. This was really interesting.
My pleasure, Lee.
That's Bruce MacEwen from Adam Smith, Esquire. If you'd like to learn more about the cases and issues we just discussed, be sure to go check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. You can see more of our videos on YouTube, and you can follow our updates on Twitter. I'm Lee Pacchia. Thanks for watching.